A lot of people will tell me one of their biggest problems is that they don't know where to come up with stories. How do you identify a story from the past? And then, of course, how do you tell it? In this episode, I'm going to break down exactly how to do that. This is going to be like the go-to place for you to uncover any story from your past and learn how to tell it in a way that resonates with your audience. So let's get started. We are first going to start with the neuroscience. We need to talk about how this all works. If you have an understanding of storytelling and where all this stuff comes from and how the brain works, then you will be able to understand why we're doing this, which will help you be more confident in telling these stories. So the first part of neuroscience is the study of narrative coherence. What narrative coherence states is that when we are able to clearly articulate our story and tell it to other people, we understand the meaning of our story. The metrics are correlated with a deeper sense of self, a deeper sense of identities, stronger identities, better communication. It's also linked to physical and psychological health. And there's all these metrics that show just being able to articulate and understand your story and understanding the meaning of like why you're here just has all these markers on what makes you a happier person at the end of the day. Now, the studies show this, but I've also noticed in myself and in my clients that when we understand our story, really what we're understanding is our essential mission in life. Like, this is why I am the way that I am. And there's another key component that I want to talk about in a second. But just this idea of being able to understand and articulate your story gives you that stronger sense of self. That just means you're more confident. If you know who you are, you believe you are who you are, and you're like, this is what I stand for in the world, this is who I am, then going out and taking bold action and living the life you want becomes way easier. So to me, the studies that prove this make a lot of sense. So what also helps you have a more coherent personal narrative? One study shows that is a direct link to expression of life lessons and a redemptive meaning. So what that means is that you choose the meaning of your story. There's a quote that I love that says, "You don't remember what happened. What you remembered becomes what happened." There's also a quote that says, or not a quote, but there's that saying that's like, there's what you say what happened, there's what I say what happened, and then there's the truth. The fact is that we will never really remember the full truth of exactly what happened. There's a story my brother and mom loved to tell about me when I was younger, about like answering the phone, and it was like or I guess maybe I thought it was a telemarketer or whatever. Somebody asked for my dad. And I answered the call, and they asked for my dad, and I was like, okay. And then I just put the phone down, and I like went back to my computer and just started working. And for whatever reason, that makes my mom like pee her pants laughing. But every time they tell the story, it changes a little bit. Like for a while, and by the way, I never thought this is how the story went, but this is the story my brother tells, and it's the story that makes my mom laugh hysterically. So they just keep on telling it. And for a while, it was like my brother saw it and my mom was outside and like blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, like now my mom and brother are both in the room and my mom was there. And I'm like, that's not how you used to tell the story. But all of a sudden, this is becoming the truth of what happened. And I have my own version of what happened and whatever. And I get kind of defensive about it. But that's besides the point. It's just a funny anecdote, and like I don't know, maybe you have this in your family where like I don't know, I'm the youngest kid, maybe I'm getting teased, and I don't like that, but getting teased about this story, I'm like, but I don't think that's how it happened, right? But they believe that's not the truth of the story, and then it's funny, year after year, every time they tell the story, it changes a little bit, and they don't seem to even notice that. They're just like, yep. They're like adding details. I'm like, you're not adding details, you're changing it. I'm kind of giving up on it. I'm like, I'm okay if you want to tease me. That's fine. I've given up. Tease me, whatever. I'll laugh about it. And then maybe part of the funny part for them might be because I get defensive. But I'm just wanting you to at least be accurate with the story year over year. And it's just evolving. So anyway, that's the truth of the story. And so what I want to point out with getting back to the fact that stories are an expression of life lessons and they have redemptive meaning. And so the whole point of my rant on that was that we give the meaning to our stories. Somebody could have the same story about something and have it mean something completely different. It's really your choice. And when you make the choice to make the story redemptive, to share life lessons in a positive, redeeming quality, this increases the effectiveness of your personal narrative. All those metrics I talked about before, that you have a deeper sense of self, that you have better communication, It does no good to say, this is my story and this is why I'm a piece of shit. No, that actually hurts all of those metrics. You can increase those metrics by choosing the meaning of your story and making it redemptive. The third and final thing about narrative coherence I want to discuss is the three metrics that help you tell better stories, which is that you have chronology, context, and theme. Chronology is that you can tell something in order, in the order of the events that happen, and you're not going like, oh, wait, I forgot about this, and then, oh yeah, then this thing happened. A lot of people do that in their stories, and it's okay, it happens. But what you want to do is practice learning how to tell things in the order of the events things happened. And I'm not talking about creating art. A movie like Pulp Fiction, which is beautiful, great movie, directed by Quentin Tarantino. That's art, and it's told out of order, and it actually makes the story really creative and cool. I took a film class in college where we broke down that movie, and then we reorganized the events in order. And it's actually like a really boring movie if it was told in order. It's like not that exciting, but because it's told out of order, it becomes a really cool movie. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to create art. If you want to do that, of course, you can do that. But if we're just trying to tell our story, it's way more effective to just tell it in order. Allow yourself to be able to follow the events, which allows your audience to be able to follow the events. Okay? And then we have context. Context meaning that we understand like where you are at in your story. We understand the year, how old you are, where you are. All of this context, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail and why it's so important, giving the specifics and context to your story allows people to immerse themselves in it, allows you to immerse yourself in it. And so we want to provide more context, not less context. Oftentimes people get too general, which I'll talk about this more in a second, but we get too general and because we think people won't get it. But that actually makes your story worse. So I'm going to break down how to get more specific and why that's so important. And then finally, theme. Theme is such an important part of telling your story. What is the theme? What is the whole point of you telling the story? Theme is really directed towards transformation, which again, I'll talk about even more in depth in a few minutes. But we need to have a clear core theme that our audience is following so that they can be like, I understand what this story is about. And that goes back to the redemptive meaning I spoke about earlier, that our story has redemptive meaning and that we understand what the redemption is. We don't have to guess. Okay, so that's narrative coherence. And there's one more piece about neuroscience I want to speak about, but I just want to recap this all by saying narrative coherence is kind of about your life story. Today, I'm not going to talk about teaching your life story. That is something I do in the Art of Story Living in the 8-week course that I teach. Because that's an important part of understanding your mission and stuff. But that takes a little bit longer than it will take to talk about in a podcast. Instead, what we're going to talk about today is thinking about one core memory and how to tell a really great story, like how to uncover a core memory of your life. And you're like, ooh, that time grandma said something to me. Instead, we're going to focus on that today. And if you can learn how to do that really effectively, then ultimately your life story is just made up of like 3, 4, or 5 of those core memories. And then you learn how to tell those with a core theme throughout. But we're not going to talk about your life story today, even though that's kind of what narrative coherence is. Instead, I'm going to help you hone in on a core memory and learn how to tell that specific memory really well. And again, if you can do that with one memory really well, then all your life story really is linking 3 to 5 of those core memories together in a coherent way. And so the final piece of neuroscience I want to talk about is how the brain captures memory. And this is going to help us lead into how do we uncover stories to tell. So the brain captures memory through heightened emotions. You remember the things in your life that are associated with heightened emotions. You remember the moment you found out that an important person in your life died. You remember the time you had to tell your partner they told you they wanted to break up. All of those are associated with heightened emotions. It's also the same for positive emotions. You remember the best, like if you think about your favorite vacation, let's say you're on vacation for a week. You don't think of the whole week-long vacation. No, like when I think of going to Italy for 10 days with my family in 2008, I don't think about the whole vacation as a whole. I actually, my brain first goes to the best day. The best day where we were at a vineyard and we were the only ones there and we got absolutely hammered and these two brothers, these Italian brothers. They barely spoke English. They were just bringing out bottles of wine. They were bringing out food. We didn't even have to ask for anything. And we watched the sunset over this vineyard, and it was just us. It was just me and my mom, dad, and brother. Like, that is a core memory that I remember. It's not the whole trip of Italy, because we were there for 10 days. And yes, I can start to pull apart other days from that trip and start to tell those moments, but that's what it is. These are these core memories, and that's how your brain remembers something. Heightened emotion, these amazing times, these bad times, the stuff in between, the boring days, the monotonous days, we don't really remember those. We remember the days of heightened emotions, the day you got your first job, the day you got fired, the day you had your baby, right? All of these things have heightened emotions to it. And then your brain takes a snapshot, and that is what you remember. And then you do the work to go into that snapshot and then start to fill out the rest of the scene. And so that's the neuroscience of how our brain captures memory, long-term memory, is through heightened emotions. And that is going to take us into step 2. So now we've gone over the neuroscience. Now we're going to talk about how do you actually uncover a story worth telling. So let's talk now about how do you uncover a story worth telling. And it starts with that core memory. So what I would have you do right now is to think of a core memory. You give yourself a second and think about a memory from your past. It could literally have been last week. Or you can go back to childhood and think of one of the best days of childhood. And if you struggle doing this, I can cue you a little bit and to just think of like holidays, maybe a birthday, maybe a first time doing something, first home run you hit in Little League. I want you to think about it. In fact, I'm not even sure if I want to cue you, because what would be even better is that when I said think of a core memory, you thought of something. You did. You thought of a core memory. And whatever came up, start to immerse yourself into that. Maybe you thought of grandma, and then once you hear the word grandma, once grandma came into your head and you're like, I don't have a core memory. It's like, well, if you thought of something, if you thought of grandma or you thought of your hometown, whatever happened when you thought of your core memory, you thought of something. And now from there, I want you to think about that thing and the thing you remember most about it. And then you start to realize you're immersing yourself in a specific moment of time. This is a core memory. And the question to ask yourself is, why do you remember that thing? This is where we get back to meaning. What meaning do you make of that moment of time? Now, why most people think they don't have a story is because they haven't actually assigned meaning to the thing. They just have a memory. Oh, my grandfather gave me this gift. I was on this walk with my partner when they said this thing. And so you have this core memory, but you haven't yet assigned meaning to it. And now that is your task here. And now remember, what we really want to do is we want to assign a life lesson, or we want to assign that redemptive meaning to this thing. Why, like, you get to choose, and most people just don't choose. And I'm telling you to just make a choice. Why does this core memory get to exist in your brain rent-free? Choose a meaning behind this event. And I'm going to kind of take you through a process for that. And the process we will look at comes from this book called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. And he calls these specific moments 5-second moments. And what I want you to uncover in this memory is what your 5-second moment is. Matthew Dix talks about a 5-second moment like this. It's the moment in time where you go from one understanding about the world to another. Or maybe an understanding about yourself to another. Where you have lived life this way with this viewpoint. And then something happens. Somebody says something. And then you go, oh my God, wait a second. You kind of have that aha moment like, oh, I think life is actually more like this. Or I think the world is really, this is what's happening in the world. The world doesn't have to be such a bad place. The world is beautiful. Always. I can see the light in everything, right? Maybe you are out to dinner with, another couple, and you're on a double date. And the way the guy asks his wife a question, you all of a sudden, even though he wasn't meaning to do this, you all of a sudden are sitting there and going, oh my God, The way Michael asks his wife questions. He's always asking, oh my God, I realize he's always asking her questions. I'm not as curious with my wife as I could be. And maybe that's why there's always such a misunderstanding. I realize that I'm so defensive, but Michael always seems to be so curious and never takes offense to anything. Wow, I can really practice that. It's that dinner is your 5-second moment. And oftentimes, these moments are seemingly mundane, right? It's not some spectacular dinner when you went out celebrating the launch of your new product and it was super, or you went out to celebrate your new promotion. No, it was just another Friday double date dinner that you did. But oh my God, were you sitting there in awe of your friend Michael and the way he communicated with his wife? It was a nothing dinner, but it changed the way you saw the world. And ultimately, that's what I want you to find. So I kind of asked you about a core memory. And I think maybe sometimes we go to the core memory of those best moments of your life, but that's not even what the story needs to be. And I did talk about the heightened emotions, right? But there are these heightened emotions where we have this sudden realization and our life shifts. And I think that's where our stories really get to exist. And we have a lot of those. And this can take a lot of practice. So if you're not really sure what that is right now, that's okay. I think if you keep listening, you might uncover it. And with a bit of practice, and I really highly recommend a journal process, you'll start to uncover more of these moments and these memories. But it's just about asking yourself, what was a time in my life where I shifted my perspective? And that's the 5-second moment we're after. And so if you can think of the 5-second moment where your perspective shift, and maybe it was a boss said something to you. Maybe you were in a program and the coach was like really mean, but actually they were really just telling you what you needed to hear. And maybe you didn't realize that until a year later. Like that year later, the moment you realized it, that's the moment. And so that's the moment I'm offering you to look for. And what I want you to do now is to name that moment. Give it that redemptive meaning. What did you realize about yourself or the world that completely changed your perspective and changed how you showed up? All right, now if you have that, we can move on to the next step, which is to just learn how to tell this story effectively. Okay, so the first thing, you're going to see a pattern here that's happening. But what makes a good story? We need to answer that question. What makes a good story? The first thing that makes a good story, we'll start with Ernest Hemingway. Now, there is a lore that Ernest Hemingway bet his writer friends that he could tell a story in 6 words. And they all said, no way, dude. You can't do that. You can't develop plot. You can't develop a character arc. Like, you can't tell a story in 6 words. That's just not possible. And then he said this: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And I want you to just sit with that. And I want you to notice what happens when you think about that and when you really let those words settle in your body. For sale baby shoes, never worn. Somebody's selling baby shoes that were never worn, probably because their baby died. And what that does in you is it creates emotion. And you don't have to be a parent or an expecting parent to feel that, to feel the heartache around that. And so that is lesson number 1. We go back to the same thing I just told you, emotion. The same thing that creates memories is the same thing that makes a great story. And if you only had that in your story, you would have told a good story. It reminds me of the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy, if you've ever read that book. The character doesn't really go through any transformation. Nothing like really happens in the book, honestly. But man, if I don't remember that book for the rest of my life. I read it like a decade ago and I've read it another time since. But I always think about that book. And the only thing that really happens is that, it's just painful. It's just really painful. And that's it. And that's what makes a good story. Now, however, if you're listening to this podcast, you are somebody who wants to do meaningful work and change the world. So we're not just creating art like The Road or like Ernest Hemingway telling a story. What we really want to do is offer change for people. And so we need something else for our story. And so in 2011, Emma Coates is a story author for Pixar. And in 2011, she tweets the 22 rules for storytelling Pixar's 22 rules for storytelling. And this tweet goes absolutely viral, goes bananas, goes nuts. And all the rules are great. But if I could offer you one thing, it is rule number 1, which is that we admire a character for trying more than for their success. We admire a character for trying more than for their success. If we don't learn about a character's trying, we don't actually care about their success. It does no good to tell people, I made $1 million. I have my dream partner. I got the promotion, whatever. None of that's a good story. We need to learn about the trying. And the first thing I would offer you is, 1, could you admire yourself for the trying? Could you show yourself a tremendous amount of love for all the trying you've put in to live a happier life? I hope you're able to do that for yourself, because that is ultimately step 1. And when you do tell your story is a celebration of a past version of you who tried, who really tried so hard, and hopefully got something in the end. And so we admire a character for trying. So admire yourself for trying. But what this rule tells me is that the character goes through a transformation, right? We are trying to become somebody else. And that's just what I asked you to do. What was the lesson? What was the transformation you went through? When you uncover that core memory, the meaning you make to it, the lesson, that means you went from one person to another. That is your 5-second moment. And that is the transformation. And in that transformation, you have tried. And that's what we're going to admire you for. So what your story ultimately is you telling people about the trying. That's what you want to get across, is that I was this person and I experienced a new way of living, and now I have tried to become this other person, and I think I've done it. I have learned this lesson, and I have gotten this reward. And so that is the second part of your story, is to understand the trying, the transformation. What transformation did you go through? And your job is to choose one transformation, one core transformation. And that is what your life story should be. And I know we're not talking about a life story today, but the reason why it's so difficult for you to tell your life story and why it feels overwhelming to tell, why sometimes people feel like it's overwhelming to listen to, is because you're trying to tell multiple transformations. And now that's a really hard thing to do in your life story because you've gone through a lot of things and you've learned a lot of lessons, which is why I'm not teaching you how to tell your life story right now. Because if I teach you how to tell your life story, I'm going to ask you to narrow it down into one core transformation. That's really hard to do, and it takes some coaching to do. I honestly don't think I'd be able to do it just by creating a podcast episode. It needs conversation. It needs guidance. And that's why I have my program to do that. So if you ever do want to tell your life story and you want to uncover your mission in life and you want to be able to tell your full life story, you want to create true narrative coherence, sign up for the waitlist, get on the Art of Story Living. That's something we do within the first 2 weeks. But today, like I said earlier, it's much easier to tell a moment in time and to tell that one clear transformation compared to telling your whole life story, which is like overwhelming. And like, again, you've gone through a lot of stuff, so it's really hard. But if you can learn how to just tell one story, then you'll start to get the practice in of learning how to just say one core transformation, one core lesson. That's what you need to do. And then your story is going to be less overwhelming for you to tell, and it's going to be less overwhelming for your audience to listen to. Right? So even if you think about a core moment, you're like, well, this, and it also meant this, and it also meant this. Now what you're having to do is you're having to open up a few different loops, and you're going to have to tie in all of those loops at the end of your story. You have to bring them all back together. And if you don't do that, again, you're overwhelmed, your audience is overwhelmed, your audience is left kind of hanging, like, whoa, you talked about your relationship, your work life, and this, and like all these things, but at the end of your story, you only said this one thing. Like, what about those other things you mentioned? You don't want to leave your audience hanging. It creates kind of a dissonance in your story. And so what you want to understand from this core moment, what is the one core meaning and what is the transformation you went through? So if I give that dinner example, out to dinner with your friends, you're like, oh, I used to be this person who would be really defensive. And then 5-second moment, I watched my friend Mike say this thing. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm defensive. I can be more curious, which might be more loving, which might create a deeper relationship with my partner. And then you talk about the trying. You talk about the moment you tried. You noticed yourself getting defensive, and then I tried to be less defensive. I did this thing, and oh my God, it created this deep connection with my partner. And that's the reward. And that's what you end with. You get the reward, which is the thing your audience wants. Your audience wants that reward, deeper connection with your partner. That's ultimately a story. And the final thing I want to share with you is the details. So, think of your favorite movie. You're obviously not going to be able to answer and tell me what your favorite movie is, but I'll go with Lion King because most people have seen Lion King. The Lion King is a very specific story with very specific events and details, and it is not the story of your life. You are not a baby cub in Africa whose evil uncle Scar killed your father and threw him off a cliff. You didn't run away because you couldn't handle the death and you blamed yourself for his death. And you don't have a toucan in your ear chirping away, and your best friends aren't a meerkat and a warthog who sing you Hakuna Matata when you're feeling down. Your mentor isn't a baboon who rubs coconut juice on your head when you're a baby. None of this is your story. But you see all those specific details? Your evil Uncle Scar didn't throw your father off a cliff. But you know what it's like to experience loss. You may have even blamed yourself for the loss or the relationship of a loved one. You may know what it's like to doubt yourself and know if you're capable, just like Simba did. Even though you're not a little lion trying to become king of the jungle, you know what it's like to doubt yourself. And so this is true for every movie. Every movie has specific details. And what the specific details do is invite you into the scene of the events. And when you get invited into the scene, you can actually feel the emotions. When Simba's laying over his father's body and he's saying, Dad, Dad, no. And then evil Uncle Scar comes up and says, this is your fault and you should run away. You can feel all of that because you are invited into the scene. But what most people do is they get really general. They get really general because they say, people won't get it. This is too specific. People won't get it. So I'm going to be really general. I'm going to say, well, one time, my dad died and I really wasn't sure about where my life was headed. And so this created a lot of confusion in my life. But then I remembered who I was and that I have something great to offer this world. And so I came back home and I created something beautiful. I became the king of my own jungle. You see, that story is emotionless because I kept it really broad and general. But if I said, one day I was out in a pasture and my dad got trampled by a stampede. And I was the reason my dad was out in that pasture. And I was the reason my dad got trampled by that stampede. And I walked up to him and I watched him die. And I walked up to him and I said, Dad, I'm sorry. No, I'm so sorry. And just standing over my father's body. And then my uncle approached me. And my uncle affirmed that it was my fault. That it was my fault my father's dead, and I couldn't live with that. And my uncle said, you should run away. And I thought he was right. I had to run away. I couldn't face my mom. I couldn't face my community. I certainly couldn't live up to the expectations everybody had for me. How am I supposed to be the king of the jungle? I just killed my father. My uncle was right. And so I ran away. And blah, 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 on and on, right? You see how that was way more effective and brings you into the emotion. It brought me into the emotion of telling the story, even though it's not my story. I was just telling Simba's story. But inviting you into the details allows you to immerse yourself in the emotion with me. And what did we already talk about? Core memories. Core memories are made through emotion. And when you invite your audience into the scene so they can feel the emotion, well, now they're going to remember your story and they're actually going to care about it. And by inviting them into the story, even though you're not a baby cub in Africa whose evil uncle killed their father and you blamed yourself for the death of him and you ran away, you find yourself in that story. It doesn't have to be the details of your story. You, as a human who just wants to belong and is always just trying to belong, so is looking for every way to relate to other people, is going to find yourself in that story. And so what do you do? Even when I told the story of going on a double date with your friends, Michael, when you're listening to that story, you put yourself in a restaurant. Now, I don't know what your restaurant looks like, but you put yourself in a restaurant and you imagine yourself on a double date, even if you're not with somebody, even if you're single, right? I'm single, but I imagined I was with a partner, and I imagined my other friends who are dating, and I immerse myself in the details of that scene so that I could feel it. We're always doing this. Now, I wasn't really telling a story, but like we're always doing this. We're always creating images in our head and immersing ourselves in those details. And the more you can do that, the more people can immerse themselves in your story, really understand the specifics of it so that they can find themselves in it, so that they can feel the emotions of what it's like to be the person who you were before and to be the person who you are after. And so if we go back to my example of you telling this story, the restaurant example, you give them context to the person you were, you invite them into the 5-second moment at the restaurant, and you use the details. Tell me about that. What kind of restaurant are you at? Allow me to start to picture it. Who are these friends? Are they your close friends, friends you just met? If you give them the details of it being your best friend, even just saying your best friend, well, then I know you've hung out with them a lot. And you probably know your friend's partner. And so just by saying it's my best friend, rather than just saying I was out with a friend, well, like, no, this is my best longtime friend. It's like, then you really know that person. And so you've probably been observing them for a long time. So I start to make these assertions about your relationship. And I imagine myself with my best friend and observing my best friend, right? And so I invite you into the scene, into the details of that dinner with my friend, and then I talk about that moment. And it's not just, oh, and then my friend said something to his partner. No, you would say, and then his partner said, and then his partner challenged him on his beliefs, and she was like, I don't think that's true. I think you've always, whatever. It's hard to just make something up. But don't just say like, oh, she challenged him in his beliefs. Say what she said. And if you don't remember it, you can kind of like, I don't want to say make something up, but kind of. You're probably never going to remember what she said, but can you remember roughly what she said? And can you just give us an opportunity to immerse ourselves in the specifics of that by like, yeah, she like questioned him on his beliefs. And instead of him getting defensive, I just noticed that here's what he said. He said, oh, thanks, babe. Like, maybe you're right. Maybe I could do a little bit better. How do you think I could do better? And I just noticed that, and I was like, whoa. Like, I would have gotten defensive there. I could even feel myself at the dinner table getting defensive. I could feel my chest tighten and blah, 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 right? And you'd give the details of that moment. But I actually felt my chest open as I witnessed my best friend just be curious and not get defensive. And that just changed something in me. And I realized he's always done this. And that's why him and his wife have such a beautiful relationship, right? And so you would talk about that 5-second moment. You would give the details. And then you would say, this is who I get to be now. I get to be more curious with my wife. And then you would take us into the next scene. Bring us into the details of the next moment where you actually try, the trying. Not just say, oh, and then I was more curious with my wife and now we have a deeper relationship. No, I want you to take me into the moment where she challenges you and you had an opportunity to get defensive. What did she say? Oh my God, she was like, Matt, I told you to take the dishes out. And then I was like, I just felt myself get so defensive. But then I remembered Mike at dinner, and I remembered there's an opportunity to change. And I said, took a deep breath, and I said, yes, you're right. You did tell me to take the dishes out, to take the trash out. or to do the dishes or whatever, right? Um, and then whatever, and then like explain that exact moment, because now when even the details of saying like my wife told me to do the dishes, that's probably an experience you have with your partner. Or my wife told me to help her clean, the bathroom. Like I never clean, and she asked me to help her clean, and then I was gonna get defensive and be like, "Well, you didn't know. Like, why don't you just ask me?" And instead, I just got curious. Like because of just those details, you can immerse yourself in like, oh, my wife and I don't have a problem with cleaning the apartment. Like we're really good about that. But she does ask me to plan date nights more often. Like you will find yourself in that scenario. But if I don't give you something to pull from, you can't do that. And if you can't do that, then you can't immerse yourself in the emotions. You can't actually feel it. The details allow us to feel it. And then so immerse us in the details of the trying. And then if you've done that, you can talk about the reward. Because I did that, because I got curious with her and just gave her a hug, oh my God, we had the best sex ever that night. We're more connected, right? And then you tell them the reward, because the reward is what your audience really wants. And because you are embodied and you are not just making shit up, you are not talking about some way of being that you believe, but you're not actually in integrity about. No, you talk about being in integrity and actually doing the thing. That's what makes you a leader. And that shows the proof of who you are to your audience. And they say, that's who I want to be. And I watch Matt model it, and so I get to become that. I know he can help me with that because he models it. And that's what makes a great story as a leader. And so I think that's it. I think that wraps it up. And so your whole story exists to prove I was this, now I am this. I was this thing happened, I embody that characteristic, and I'll show you the details of embodying that, which gets me the reward, and you can do the same. And that's what you're offering people in your story. An opportunity, not proof as like, ooh, look at me. It's not look at me. It's being in it with them. It's saying like, I get it. I know what it's like to be really defensive, but you can change. And here's how I changed in a moment. And now because I offered you this specific scene, next time your wife asks you to take out the trash or to do the dishes or to help her clean, you can respond, instead of being defensive, you can respond like this. And maybe you will also have the best sex of your life too. And that's it. That's great storytelling. That's all I got for you. If this is helpful, please take a moment to hit that 5 stars on Spotify or go leave a rating on Apple. It really helps me get this message out to other people. And I want to help more people. So I appreciate you. If this helps you, share it with a friend, but really leave that review. And that's it. Thanks so much for being here. Peace out.